New Year's Eve at Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. Nyla Voss, billionaire CEO, three-time Fortune cover feature, stood at the host stand and heard words she never expected. No tables available. She could buy the building. She couldn't buy a seat. As Nyla turned toward the door, past families laughing over champagne and children counting down to midnight, a man and his young daughter suddenly stood. He looked directly at her and waved. Why would such a small gesture change everything about this night? Nyla Voss had walked into boardrooms where billionaires went silent. She had stared down investors twice her age and made them blink first. But standing at the host stand of Lemon Oshante on New Year's Eve, she felt something unfamiliar crawling up her spine. Powerlessness. The host was young, polished, professionally apologetic. He smiled the way people smiled when they delivered bad news to someone they assumed could handle it. Nyla did not feel like handling it. She had left her assistant at home. No driver waiting outside. No reservation made weeks in advance because she never imagined needing one. Tonight was supposed to be different. Tonight she had wanted to be just a woman having dinner alone, but by choice. The restaurant glowed like a jewelry box. Crystal chandeliers scattered light across white tablecloths. Families filled every table. Children in velvet dresses. Couples leaning close over wine. Laughter rolled through the space in waves, comfortable and easy, like people who belonged to each other. Nyla stood at the edge of it all, holding her coat, feeling the weight of eyes that didn't recognize her. She had been on the cover of Fortune 3 times. Here, she was just someone without a reservation. The host gestured vaguely toward the bar. He suggested she could wait, though he made it clear nothing would open up. His tone was kind, but firm. Nyla understood tone. She had used it herself 1,000 times. This was the tone of a door closing. She thought about offering money. She could triple the price of a table. She could buy the entire night for someone else and take their spot. The words formed in her throat, but didn't come out. Buying her way in would only confirm what she already felt, that she didn't belong here. Not tonight. Nyla turned toward the exit. She moved slowly, her heels clicking against marble, and every step felt like a small defeat. Around her, the restaurant pulsed with warmth she couldn't touch. A father poured sparkling cider for his son. A grandmother wiped frosting from a toddler's cheek. A couple raised their glasses and clinked them together, soft and certain. Nyla had built an empire. She had shaped markets and launched products and changed industries. But she couldn't buy her way into this. She couldn't negotiate herself a family. She reached for the door handle. Cold air slipped through the gap, sharp against her skin. Outside, the city glittered with a kind of mocking brightness. Everywhere, people were celebrating. Everywhere, people had someone. Nyla tightened her grip on her coat. She would go home. She would pour herself scotch and sit by the window and watch the fireworks alone the way she had done for the past 4 years. It was fine. She had chosen this life. She had traded closeness for control, and control had made her unstoppable, untouchable. Then, she heard it. A small voice, clear and curious, cutting through the noise. A child's voice. Nyla looked back without meaning to. Near the center of the dining room, a little girl was standing on her chair, one hand gripping the edge of the table. She was maybe 6 or 7, with thick, dark coils pulled back with a glittery clip. She was staring directly at Nyla, not with recognition, not with pity, just with the kind of open attention children gave to things that confused them. The girl tugged on the sleeve of the man sitting beside her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his rich brown skin contrasting against a simple button-down that looked carefully ironed. He had the kind of face that carried weight quietly, tired eyes, strong hands. He glanced at his daughter, then followed her gaze across the room to where Nyla stood frozen in the doorway. The girl said something Nyla couldn't hear. The man leaned down, listening. His expression shifted. Surprise, maybe, or hesitation. He looked at Nyla again, longer this time, and something passed across his face that she couldn't name. Then he straightened. He glanced at the empty chair across from him. He looked back at Nyla, and then slowly he raised one hand and waved. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't confident. His hand lifted, hesitant, almost awkward, and stayed there for only a second before dropping back to the table. But it was unmistakable, an invitation. Nyla stood completely still. She didn't understand what was happening. People didn't invite her to things. People asked her for things. People wanted her approval, her investment, her time. But no one just waved her over to share a table on New Year's Eve. The little girl was smiling now, bouncing slightly on her chair. She waved too, both hands in the air as if Nyla were someone she'd been waiting for. The man said something to her, gentle and low, and the girl sat back down, but kept watching. Nyla felt every eye in the room shift toward her. The host had noticed. A waiter slowed near the kitchen door. A woman at the next table leaned toward her husband and whispered. Nyla's instinct was to leave, to walk out with her dignity intact, and pretend this moment had never happened. Accepting help from strangers meant admitting she needed it. It meant sitting at a table where she wasn't in control, where she didn't set the terms, where she would be, for the first time in years, just a guest. But her hand had already released the door. Her feet had already turned. She walked back through the restaurant, past the tables full of families, past the host who looked faintly surprised, past the hum of conversation that seemed to pause and then resume around her. She reached the table where the man and the little girl waited. Up close, she could see the girl's dress was slightly wrinkled, like it had been packed in a suitcase. The man's tie was crooked. There were 2 plates on the table, half finished, a glass of water, a pink lemonade with a straw. The man stood when she arrived. He didn't offer his hand. He just gestured to the chair across from him and said in a voice that was careful and kind that they had an extra seat if she wanted it. Nyla looked at him. She looked at the girl who was grinning, like this was the best idea anyone had ever had. She looked at the empty chair, and then for the first time in a long time, Nyla Voss made a choice that had nothing to do with strategy. She sat down. The girl introduced herself immediately. Her name was Aria. She was 7 3/4, and she liked unicorns and science and mac and cheese in that order. She talked, the way children talked when they weren't performing for adults, fast and honest and without filter. She asked Nyla if she liked the restaurant, if she was here alone, if she had any kids. Nyla answered quietly, unsure how to match the girl's ease. No kids. Yes, alone. The restaurant was beautiful. The man finally spoke. His name was Damien Holt. He didn't explain why he had waved her over. He didn't apologize for the intrusion or make a joke to smooth the strangeness. He just said it was nice to meet her and asked if she'd eaten yet. Nyla said she hadn't. Damien flagged down a waiter without hesitation, as if inviting a stranger to join them on New Year's Eve was the most natural thing in the world. Nyla sat with her hands folded in her lap, her coat draped over the back of the chair. She felt awkward, exposed, like she had walked into someone else's life and didn't know the script. But Aria kept talking, kept asking questions, kept pulling Nyla into the moment with a kind of fearless curiosity that left no room for retreat. And Damien, quiet and steady across the table, didn't try to fill the silence. He just let it sit. Let her sit. Let the night unfold however it needed to. For the first time in years, Nyla Voss was not in control. And somehow, that didn't feel like losing. The waiter arrived with a menu, and Nyla accepted it without looking at the prices. Old habit. She scanned the descriptions, aware that Aria was watching her with the kind of attention that made adults self-conscious. The girl had propped her chin on both hands and was staring openly as if Nyla were a puzzle she was trying to solve. Damien glanced at his daughter, then at Nyla. and something like apology flickered across his face. Arya broke the silence first. She asked Nyla what her favorite color was. The question was so unexpected that Nyla almost laughed. She said, "Blue." Arya nodded seriously, as if this confirmed something important, and announced that her own favorite was purple, not pink, because everyone always assumed pink. Purple like the sky right before it got dark. Nyla found herself nodding back, matching the girl's seriousness, and realized she couldn't remember the last time someone had asked her anything that wasn't about money or strategy or market projections. Damien ordered for Arya without needing to ask what she wanted. Chicken tenders and fries, plain, no sauce. He ordered a steak for himself, medium rare, and a side salad. When the waiter turned to Nyla, she hesitated. She usually ordered whatever seemed appropriate for the setting. Tonight, she didn't know what that was. She asked for the salmon and handed back the menu before she could second-guess herself. The waiter disappeared, and the silence returned. But it felt different now, less fragile. Arya asked if Nyla liked animals. Nyla said she did, though she didn't have any pets. Arya said she wanted a dog, but their apartment didn't allow them. She described in great detail the kind of dog she would get if she could, a golden retriever, or maybe a husky, or actually maybe one of those small, fluffy ones that looked like a cloud. Damien listened with the patience of someone who had heard this list many times before. He didn't interrupt. He just let his daughter talk. And Nyla noticed the way he watched her, the way his whole body seemed to soften when Arya smiled. Nyla asked Arya what she wanted to be when she grew up. Arya said a scientist or a baker, or maybe both. She could invent new kinds of cake, she explained, like one that tasted like strawberries but was actually made of spinach so it would be healthy. Nyla said that sounded like a good idea. Arya beamed. Damien caught Nyla's eye across the table, and for a second, something like understanding passed between them. A shared recognition that this girl was extraordinary and they were both just trying to keep up. The food arrived and the conversation shifted into the easy rhythm of eating. Arya talked, between bites, asking questions that had no agenda. Did Nyla like roller coasters? Had she ever been to the ocean? What was her favorite kind of pizza? Nyla answered each one, surprised by how much she had forgotten about herself. She liked roller coasters, but hadn't been on one in 20 years. She had been to the ocean once as a child in North Carolina and remembered the sand being too hot to walk on. Her favorite pizza was plain cheese, which Arya declared was the only correct answer. Damien spoke less, but when he did, his voice carried a steadiness that Nyla found oddly comforting. He didn't try to impress her. He didn't ask what she did for a living or where she lived, or any of the questions people usually asked when they were trying to place her in their mental hierarchy. He just existed across the table, present and unhurried, and let the evening unfold at its own pace. Arya finished her chicken tenders and announced that she needed to use the bathroom. Damien stood, immediately, but Arya shook her head and said she could go by herself. She was 7 3/4, she reminded him, which was old enough. Damien hesitated, then glanced toward the restrooms near the back of the restaurant. He told Arya to come right back, and she rolled her eyes in the way children did when their parents worried too much. She slid off her chair and walked away, glittery clip bobbing with each step. The table fell quiet. Nyla looked down at her salmon, aware suddenly of how little she and Damien had spoken directly to each other. He was cutting his steak with careful precision, and she wondered if he felt as awkward as she did. She searched for something to say, something that wouldn't sound like small talk or prying. She asked how long he and Arya had lived in the city. Damien looked up, slightly surprised, and said about 3 years. They had moved from Boston after his wife passed away. He said it simply, without drama, the way people stated facts they had. Lived with long enough to carry without breaking. Nyla felt the air shift. She didn't know what to say. Condolences felt insufficient. Silence felt wrong. She settled on saying she was sorry, and Damien nodded, accepting it the way he probably accepted all expressions of sympathy, with quiet grace and no expectation of more. He explained that his wife had been sick for a long time. Arya had been 4 when she died, old enough to remember her, but young enough that the memories were starting to blur. Damien said it had been hard at first, figuring out how to be both parents, how to braid hair and pack lunches and show up to school events when all he wanted to do was disappear into his grief. But Arya had needed him, and that need had pulled him forward one day at a time until the days became years and the weight became something he knew how to carry. Neela listened without interrupting. She didn't offer advice or try to relate his experience to anything in her own life. She just listened, and Damien seemed to appreciate that. He said Arya was the reason he got out of bed most mornings, the reason he kept going. She made everything make sense in a way nothing else did. Nyla thought about her own mornings, the alarm at 5, the coffee she drank standing by the window, the emails she answered before the sun came up. She had built her entire life around making things make sense, but she had never needed another person to do it. Damien asked gently if Nyla had family in the city. It was the first personal question he had asked, and Nyla felt her defenses rise instinctively. She could deflect. She could give a vague answer and steer the conversation back to safer ground, but something about the way he asked, without judgment or expectation, made her want to answer honestly. She said no. Her parents had passed away years ago. She had a brother in Seattle, but they didn't talk much. Work had taken up most of her life, and by the time she looked up, she realized she had built an empire, but forgotten to build anything else. The words came out more raw than she intended. Damien didn't rush to fill the silence. He just nodded, as if he understood exactly what she meant. He said loneliness was strange that way. It could exist even in a room full of people, even in a life full of accomplishments. Nyla felt something crack open inside her chest. She had spent so many years convincing herself that she didn't need anyone, that independence was the same as strength. But sitting across from Damien, she realized she had been lying to herself. She was lonely. She had been lonely for a long time. Arya returned, breathless and grinning, and climbed back into her chair. She announced that there was a giant fish tank in the hallway and that she had counted 17 fish. But one of them was hiding, so there might be 18. Damien smiled and asked if she had washed her hands. Arya held them up as proof. The moment passed, easy and warm, and Nyla felt herself relax in a way she hadn't in years. Arya asked Nyla if she had ever made a wish on a shooting star. Nyla said she hadn't seen one in a long time. Arya said that was sad because wishes were important. You had to make them, even if you didn't think they would come true, because sometimes the universe was listening. Nyla asked what Arya would wish for. Arya thought about it seriously, tilting her head to one side. She said she would wish for her dad to be happy. Not just okay, but really happy, the way people were in movies. Damien looked at his daughter with an expression Nyla couldn't quite name. Love, yes, but also something deeper. Gratitude, maybe, or wonder. He told Arya he was already happy because he had her. Arya frowned and said that wasn't the same. She wanted him to have someone to laugh with when she was at school, someone to watch movies with after she went to bed, someone who made him smile the way he made her smile. Nyla felt like she was intruding on something private. She looked down at her plate, but she could feel the weight of the moment settling over the table. Damien cleared his throat and said that he was doing fine, that Arya didn't need to worry about him, but Arya just shrugged, unconvinced, and went back to eating her fries. The conversation moved on, but Nyla couldn't shake the feeling that she had just witnessed something achingly honest. Dessert arrived without anyone ordering it. The waiter explained that the restaurant offered complimentary chocolate cake to every table on New Year's Eve. Arya's eyes went wide. Damien thanked the waiter and cut the cake into 3 pieces, sliding one toward Nyla without asking if she wanted it. She accepted it, and they ate in companionable silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Arya asked Nyla if she believed in New Year's resolutions. Nyla said she used to, but she had stopped making them because she never kept them. Arya asked why not. Nyla thought about it. She said she supposed she had always made resolutions about work, about hitting revenue targets or launching products or expanding into new markets. But those didn't feel like real resolutions. They were just goals dressed up as promises. Arya asked what a real resolution would be. Nyla didn't have an answer. She had spent so long measuring her life in metrics and milestones that she didn't know what else to measure it by. Damien said quietly that maybe a real resolution was about becoming someone, not achieving something, about being kinder or braver or more present. Nyla looked at him, and he looked back, and she realized he wasn't talking to Arya anymore. He was talking to her. The restaurant had grown louder. Families were finishing their meals, gathering coats, preparing for the countdown. Arya bounced in her seat, asking how much longer until midnight. Damien checked his watch and said about 40 minutes. Arya groaned dramatically and said that was forever. Damien laughed, and the sound was warm and unguarded, and Nyla realized she hadn't heard him laugh before. It changed his whole face, made him look younger, less tired. Nyla excused herself to use the restroom. She walked through the restaurant, past tables full of people who belonged to each other, and locked herself in a stall. She stood there for a moment, breathing, trying to process what she was feeling. She hadn't expected tonight to matter. She had come to the restaurant out of desperation, out of a refusal to sit alone in her apartment one more year. But now, sitting with Damien and Arya, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt seen. Not as Nyla Voss, CEO, not as the woman on the cover of Fortune, just as a person, flawed and lonely and trying. She washed her hands and looked at herself in the mirror. Her makeup was still perfect, her deep brown skin glowing under the soft bathroom lights, her locks pinned in an elegant updo. But her eyes looked different, softer maybe, or sadder. She wasn't sure. She dried her hands and walked back to the table, and when she sat down, Arya smiled at her like she had been missed. Damien poured more water into Nyla's glass without asking. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant, like he had decided she belonged there, like she wasn't just a stranger they had invited out of pity. Nyla thanked him, and he nodded, and the silence between them felt comfortable now, familiar almost. Arya started drawing on her napkin with a crayon the waiter had brought earlier. She drew a house with a triangle roof and a sun with too many rays. She drew 3 stick figures holding hands. She pointed to the tallest one and said that was her dad. The medium one was herself. The smallest one, she said, was Nyla. Nyla stared at the drawing, at the 3 figures connected by carefully drawn lines, and felt something twist in her chest. She asked Arya why she had made her so small. Arya said it was because Nyla seemed sad, and sad people took up less space. Nyla didn't know what to say to that. Damien looked at the drawing, then at Nyla, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that his daughter saw things adults tried to hide. The countdown was beginning. Voices rose across the restaurant, people gathering near the windows to watch the fireworks. Arya grabbed her father's hand and tugged him toward the glass. Damien stood, then looked back at Nyla. He didn't say anything. He just waited. Nyla rose slowly and followed them to the window. Arya positioned herself between them, holding both their hands, and Nyla felt the small, warm grip and realized she couldn't remember the last time she had held someone's hand. The crowd began counting down. 10, 9, 8. Nyla looked at the people around her. Couples kissing, families cheering, strangers embracing. 7, 6, 5. She looked at Damien, and he was looking at Arya, and Arya was looking at the sky, waiting for the fireworks. 4, 3, 2. Nyla felt the moment expanding, stretching, becoming something she would carry with her long after tonight ended. 1. The room erupted, cheers and shouts and the sound of champagne corks popping. Outside, fireworks exploded in gold and silver, lighting up the Manhattan skyline. Arya squealed and jumped, still holding their hands, and Nyla found herself smiling. Really smiling. Not the smile she wore in meetings or interviews. A real smile, unguarded and true. Arya turned and hugged her father first, fierce and tight, and Damien bent down and wrapped his arms around her. Then Arya turned to Nyla, and before Nyla could react, the girl threw her arms around her waist. Nyla stood frozen for a second, unsure what to do. Then slowly, she put her hands on Arya's back and hugged her in return. The girl smelled like cake and strawberry shampoo, and Nyla felt something inside her break open, not painfully, gently, like something that had been locked too long finally coming loose. Arya pulled back and grinned up at her. She said, "Happy New Year," and Nyla said it back, her voice thick. Damien extended his hand and Nyla shook it. His grip was firm and warm, and he held on just a second longer than necessary. He said it was good to meet her, and Nyla realized he meant it. Not good to network with her, not good to get something from her, just good to meet her as a person on a night when both of them needed not to be alone. The moment ended. Families began gathering their things. The restaurant was clearing out and reality was creeping back in. Nyla knew she should leave. She should thank them and walk out and go back to her life. But she didn't want to. She wanted to stay in this small pocket of warmth, this brief window where she wasn't a CEO or a billionaire, or someone people wanted things from. She was just Nyla, and that was enough. Damien helped Arya into her coat. The girl was yawning now, her energy finally fading. Nyla put on her own coat, fumbling slightly with the buttons. She thanked Damien for letting her join them. He said it was Arya's idea, and Arya, half asleep against her father's side, mumbled that Nyla had looked lonely. Damien didn't correct her. He just looked at Nyla with quiet understanding, and Nyla nodded because it was true. They walked toward the exit together. Nyla didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to end this, so she just walked beside them, through the restaurant, past the empty tables and the waiters clearing plates, and out into the cold New York night. The air hit her like a shock, sharp and clean, and she pulled her coat tighter. Damien said goodnight. Arya waved sleepily, and Nyla stood on the sidewalk and watched them walk away, a father and daughter disappearing into the crowd of people celebrating the new year. She stood there long after they were gone, surrounded by strangers, and realized she wasn't empty anymore. She didn't know what she was, but she wasn't empty.